Hello, and welcome to another episode of Virtual Flight Diaries. This one's going to be just a little bit of fun. So, I was browsing through Flight SimTO. Love that website. And I saw this livery for Civil Air Patrol. And it got me to thinking about the times that when I was about, 1990? So I was, 13, 14 years old. I joined up with Civil Air Patrol, and I served with them for 4 years, from 90 to 94. And back then, it was a great organization. I don't know, it's been like 30 plus years. I'm not too sure how it is these days, but I'm going to talk about it, how it was back then. So I served as a cadet. I worked up through the ranks. All cadets start at the bottom. Cadet airmen. It's a United States Air Force auxiliary, so the ranks are similar to the United States Air Force. So, they have airman, airman first class, sergeant, staff sergeant, tech sergeant, master sergeant, and chief master sergeant. Then you go to an officer's school, which is called encampment. Upon graduating there, you can test to go through the officer ranks. In the 4 years that I was in Civil Air Patrol, I worked myself up to what back then was the rank of flight officer. I was researching. Civil Air Patrol, and they did away with that rank. So I would have been, if I was in today, I would have been the rank of cadet second lieutenant. So I'm glad to see they dropped flight officer. I always thought that it was kind of I wasn't too sure that it kind of matched up with the Air Force. It seemed good that you would graduate officer school and then you would become second lieutenant. So it was kind of like the warrant officer ranks in the Army, and there wasn't too many of them. Anyway, so with Civil Air Patrol, I was with Squadron 203 out of Hazelton, and I did I served with the search and rescue team, because that's what we did. So we had an airplane, much like this. It was a 172. It wasn't all. They didn't have these liveries back then, I guess. It was just a blue and white. It was a white plane with a blue stripe, and it was pretty cool. I had a really good time. My experience was obviously different than some people I've read about Civil Air Patrol nowadays. So that's unfortunate. So search and rescue. So we search and rescue, civil defense, disaster relief. Was our mission. We did a lot of. We would go like down planes, missing persons, lost hikers, lost hunters. We were Northeast PA, so there was a lot of hunting areas that were vast. Tobyhanna, Bender's Swamp brings mind. Bender's Swamp probably is the size of what would be a good comparison? Fairmount Park, Philadelphia, and it's a swamp. The things about swamps is everything looks the same, so it's easy to get lost in them. So, lost hunters, down planes, It was an interesting experience. I did the ground search and rescue teams. I worked my way up into the being a field medic with them, and there was a lot of different other staff positions. There was ranger team. There was ranger team commander, but search and rescue team. But to backtrack a little bit, the search and rescue teams were called rangers. And so it was ranger team commander, field medic, so on and so forth. And we all trained at Hawk Mountain Wildlife Sanctuary. All over the country came to Hawk Mountain. So this particular one, so it got me to thinking about the one that I did in Williamsport. And it's interesting. So I group 20 is what I belonged to. Squadron 203 belonged to group 20 at the time. I know they restructured and it's no longer group 20, group 4 I think. But anyway, we were called in to assist group 40, which was Williamsport area, for missing persons. Lost hikers, I believe. Don't quote me. It was 32 years ago. But so we came in to assist and support, and we ended up covering the flight line. So you would have a headquarters set up in the building with a dry erase board that had all the tail numbers of all the search and rescue planes and any military planes that were being used during the search. And there was a couple Air National Guard helicopters being used in the search. So our job was to manage the in and out times to keep track of the searches. There was a big map in there with the grids marked off and which plane was doing which grid. And then there was a few of us that were out on the flight line. And our job was to help with the planes when they came in and departed, and to watch the runway, to mark the time that they actually took off and actually landed. That was what our job was. So I spent a couple days staring at this mountain range, and that's what I remember the most. It was very boring, especially being a ground search and rescue team that was pretty gung-ho about being out in the field. Although we were trained in flight line, everybody was trained in everything. That's why, I even though I wasn't a mission pilot, we knew how to do all this stuff. Or, we were taught in all aspects of the mission, from aerial to doing this flight line stuff. It was just so that we could fall into any support role that was needed. But our primary thing was being out. We wanted to be out searching for that lost hiker in the woods, boots on the ground kind of deal. So let's get started, because I've just been rambling on here and we've been looking at this plane. So why don't we get in the air and we'll talk about search grids, search patterns. So we had a Cessna 172. That's what this is. It was not as fancy. It was 1992, so we didn't have this GPS stuff. I believe they had a Loran, which was an old school GPS type of thing. Over here was a emergency locator finder. So when a plane goes down, the ELT is triggered, and that sends out a radio signal on the frequency of 121.5. So that's guard. and it sends a warble, an audible warble, out onto this frequency. And there were 2 satellites that orbited the Earth called SARSATs, search and rescue satellites. And their job is to traverse the globe and pick up this signal. So if a plane goes down, when the SARSAT would go across it, it would get a hit. And then they would wait for one more orbit to get. So we needed 2 hits. And when 2 hits happened, Scott Air Force Base would then call the local Civil Air Patrol unit and activate them. That they had two SARSAT hits, and the mission team commander would then receive the latitude and longitude of those hits, and then off we'd go to go look for that plane. I'll talk about one particularly. It was a disturbing mission with a downed airplane over in Williamsport, I think the name of the place is. It's outside of Schuylkill Haven. But we'll do that in the air. So let's get fired up. So this plane is from WB Sims. It's the steam gauge model. Let's see here. So let's get rid of some of that tie downs and stuff like that. It's good for the most part. It's a little buggy, especially if you have state saving turned on, which I don't. So fuel to both. And throttle cracked. Fuel pump on. Cool. One of the bugs is it doesn't like to start. Now we got a beacon light on and nav light can come on. Yeah, we also didn't have fancy autopilot either. So like I was saying, there was that ELT locator. So that audible warble would then be omnidirectional out of this thing. Omnidirectional, for those that don't know, means that it sends a signal out in all directions. So there's a little needle that would then point in the direction that the signal was coming from, so that the plane and ground crew, we had one as well that we'd carry with us, would then follow that signal and kind of direct us to it. And I tell you what, these emergency locating transmitters are lifesavers, because when this is operating, and it'll operate even with all the batteries dead. It had its own battery. For 3 days, I believe, it would operate. 3 or 4 days. And it can bring us right to you. You're in the middle of nowhere. You know, these things would save your life. So there was that, the ELT locator, and then a radio that the observer would use to talk to the ground teams. It had, our frequencies in it, so that he can give, his off times, and if there was, a find location, he could direct ground teams to that location while flying over. Because we operated it with different radios, we didn't have the aircraft radio. Alright, so looks like we're warmed up today. So the weather is terrible. So it's going to be very, very turbulent. It's gusty. But, you know, as long as it was clear out, we'd launch. So it's going to make searching really interesting, because we're going to get tossed around like a rag doll. Alright, so taxi light can come on. Gonna lean out the mixture for taxi. Alright, let's get going. We're going to take off runway 12. We did a lot of cool things in Civil Air Patrol. The search and rescue one was big, because that was the premise of our squadron. We lived for that. But I got to fly. I got to fly this, well, not this plane. This plane's not real, but I got to fly the real one that we had. I got a couple hours in a Cessna 172. I learned, leadership skills. I went to cadet leadership school. I became an officer, cadet officer, and I worked myself up to the staff positions at the squadron. And eventually I held the position of, where does this, you can take off at this point, flaps 8. So normally we do the run-up checks, but trying to be pressed for time here, so. And I have state saving turned off, so there's no wear and tear. We don't have to worry about it. Set the trim for takeoff. So neutral trim. Okay. So what was that? Oh yeah. So I finished in '94. I just moved on to other things. I had moved down to Southeast Pennsylvania at the time, and I had joined, the local ambulance. And me coming from a pure blood search and rescue squadron, there was a Civil Air Patrol squadron at the time down there over in Pottstown Airport, but they were they weren't into the search and rescue teams. Actually, they weren't into much. They didn't know what they're doing. They were a new squadron. It was pretty much a Boy Scout troop that got a Civil Air Patrol charter. So I went to a couple of their meetings, and then I was done with it. But before I left Squadron 203, I served as its commanding officer. I was the Cadet Squadron Commander for 203. My brother was in the organization as well. He had moved up to the ranks too. He was our Ranger Team Commander at the time. And I believe he worked his way up to Deputy Group Ranger Team Commander. He also got the rank of Second Lieutenant as well. So it was a family affair. Power back. So my brother, this brings us into the story about the plane crash over in Williamsport County. We got a call that we had, SAR-SAT hits, and we were preparing the equipment over at the Hazelton Airport, and we were heading down to Williamsport County because that's where we were told the latitude longitude is. So I mean, we learned all that navigation stuff as cadets. So we get the latitude longitude, and the first thing my brother would do as Ranger Team Commander was pull out the map, and we would translate the latitude and longitude onto the map, and that's where we get our starting area. You can see we're bouncing all over the place. So, get some trim in here. Alright. So, we knew it was a down plane, so we pulled out the emergency locator equipment, and, he would test it to make sure. I mean, that was his thing, man. He was almost a savant with this LT locator. And, we turned it on to test the battery, make sure it was working, and we were getting a weird clicking sound, like someone was on 121.5 keying up the mic. And the signal, so there was a signal sensitivity gauge on the locator, and it was fairly weak, like it was from far away. And you could use that sensitivity to determine how far away the signal was. So he was like, no. This is some kind of artifact. We never believed what it was. And what it actually was that the pilot had survived the crash, although he was horribly injured. And he thought that if he tuned his radio to 121.5 and keyed the mic every so often, that it would boost the signal of his ELT. So, and it did. We were picking up his transmission up on, up at Hazelton when it was down in Williamsport County. It was like 45 minutes, an hour away by car. But the problem that was occurring was that he was canceling out his ELT. So we couldn't find him. We couldn't use, he was pretty much nullifying our locator by doing that. We weren't able, when he would step on his transmission for his ELT, so we weren't getting a warble. It was messing up some of the sensitivity signals. And eventually what happened was, it was the middle of winter, and he succumbed to his injuries due to the cold because we couldn't locate him because he was...
Wind shear, wind shear, wind shear.
Yeah, definitely a wind shear. So that was a call out that's with active sky that I have not shut off.
Wind shear, wind shear, wind shear.
Well, that's very loud.
Wind shear, wind shear, wind shear.
Hold on a second, guys. I'm gonna trim this out a little bit.
Wind shear, wind shear, wind shear. Wind shear, wind shear, wind shear.
Because whatever's causing that wind shear is not that detrimental. Alright, hopefully that took care of that. Not going to talk over the wind shear thing. Of course there's going to be a wind shear. I'm flying along a ridge. So, we found the plane. What he did, you know, it was low visibility, and he flew into the mountain. So, moral of the story is do not use your radio to boost your ELT, because it doesn't work. And we probably would have found him if he had not done that. Probably would have found him alive, but you know, wintertime, hypothermia set in, and eventually killed him, because when you're injured, you're already coming into a lot of other biological problems, and you know, mixed with environmental, it just expedites things. You could see his entire journey. He crawled from the front seat into the back seat of the plane. He cut the seat covers off and tried to get a blanket. It was particularly, I wouldn't say horrifying, you know, there was worse ones, but that I won't get into because they're kind of graphic. But he just did that one misstep, and it didn't work out for him. So this one was missing hikers. 32 years, I don't remember which mountain it was, so we're just going to use this area. So that's why I said it was kind of inspired by the mission. So missing hikers. So the biggest type of search that you would use to find a missing person would be a grid search. And a grid search would be, so like I've been flying down this valley. So so we got this grid. This is our grid, would be this entire valley. So what you'd want to do, and you fly a grid search by the major cardinal points. It's either east-west or north-south. So you try to stay within a few degrees of those cardinal points. You're going to adjust based on terrain, but a grid search works best for flatter terrain. So like we wouldn't grid search this mountain to our, we would grid search that. That's a different type of search that I'm going to also explain and demonstrate, and it's called a contour search, but we're going to do a grid search. So first we would do, and I'm not going to do the full search because a full grid search takes about 2 hours. So we would fly the 4 corners of that search, or that search grid, just to mark the terrain, mark how the lay of the land is, and you're going to try to keep the plane around 80 knots. It's going to be tough today because it's very gusty and windy. So I'm going to try my best to keep it down to around 80 knots. And you're going to do the search, I'm going to get down because I'm too high, at about 1,000 feet to 1,500 feet above the ground. So a plane, the team that would be in the plane would be the mission pilot. His job is to fly the plane, of course, obviously, and then the observer. So in the right seat would be an observer, and their job is to manage the radio. They would be calling, the headquarters for the search, telling them times, locations, that they've entered the grid, the search had started. Wow. These winds are rough. Now, I told you guys that we'd be try not to catch that wind shear and get tossed into the ground. Now, this might be a little tough to demonstrate with these winds, but like I said, I'm going to try my best. Might opt to be a little higher. And your range was you had 1,000 feet. So you do the search between 1,000 and 2,000 feet above the ground. So you do these, you'd square off your grid, get a lay of the land, what the terrain looked like, and you might do this square at about 2,000 feet. Keeping with the cardinal points. So we're fixed for time. We're not going to do a grid search of this entire valley. I'm just going to somewhat demonstrate. But we'd keep in the cardinal points. So observer would call in, Keystone 203 to Keystone 20. We are enter the grid. Over. Yeah, we use the military. And then you would fly. So the grid would be 1 minute long. So at 80 knots, 1 minute is about 1.5 miles. So you start this grid and you go down the grid at this point for 1 minute, but we're bouncing between two ridge points in this valley, so. And then you do a 25-degree bank to the next cardinal point. And you'd want to keep that half mile. So we're going to do that about 30 seconds. So in these kind of conditions, the mission pilot is not going to be doing much observing. They can glance around, like he'd be looking over at this ridge. Maybe the hikers move there. You never know. And then after 30 seconds, we turn into the next cardinal point. Trying to keep it at 80 knots, but this wind is not going to cooperate. And we'd search the grid, and you do this for 2 hours. So, one of the major things that you wanted to do is, so you have this viewpoint that we're currently at. The way we're doing this, north-south passes, gives you a viewpoint. Okay? So say we did the whole grid, and this was going to be this next turn was going to be our final path on our grid. So we turn in, And as the pilot would be looking over, it's pretty cool, shadow going across the ground. So this is going to be our final pass. So you're going to want a different viewpoint because you may have missed it. We're looking for all kinds of things. We're looking for anything out of the ordinary, any kind of survival techniques. Maybe a signal mirror, anything. And when we do find it, we'd start circling it and then mark the latitude and longitude so we can dispatch a ground team to that location. Or if there are ground teams already in the field, because we'd be doing this concurrently, we can then redirect that ground team to the location. So we would do the grid in a square, but then we would oblique that and do diagonal search pattern to give ourselves a different view. So we come around, and then come at it at angles. 45 and 224, I believe the numbers. All the time staying 80 knots at about 1,000 feet above the ground. I'm kind of staying a little higher because the ridge winds are kind of pushing my plane down. and they can get dangerous. So mountainous terrain like this, the mission pilot actually had to hold a certification to operate in this type of terrain. The certification was administered by Civil Air Patrol, and most of our pilots were mountain terrain registered or certified, because northeast Pennsylvania and northern Pennsylvania was full of mountains. Then we'd make our turn to the next diagonal. And we cross the entire grid at this diagonal. And then, this is why it takes 2 hours, we would backtrack from the opposite direction, doing our parallel grid search, back to north and south. Just to give us all the different angles, and then we'd probably come back the opposite diagonal across the grid, and that way the entire grid is completely covered. So then that search plane could then clear that grid, meaning it was searched, complete coverage, nothing found, or if it was found. So just to give you an example of what you would do, there's a technique where flying, you can put a wing on a point and fly that. 60-degree bank. Say we found what looked like the hikers in this field. We could circle this field at 60 degrees. I keep looking back at my gauges just to make sure I maintain that so I don't fall out of the sky, because you can stall pretty easy. And we would just circle this location. 2 reasons. One, it gives the ground teams a reference point because they could see our plane up in the air circling, so they could get a quick direction. and then they can mobilize to this location and offer ground assistance to the missing persons, food, water, medical attention. And they would stay at this point as long as they can. We like Keystone 203 or Keystone 20. This is Keystone 203. We have a find at location north 43 west 30. You know, we give the latitude and longitude. The Loran was nice because you just push a button and it would give us the latitude and longitude. That's what a Loran used. Didn't have GPS location. It used a internal gyro that knew the latitude and longitude of where you were at. You had to actually warm the thing up sitting on the tarmac. So the next search that you would do is for, if you had to search a mountain. So let's head over to this mountain over here. Wow. Wind is wicked. So say our search grid was this mountain. So the first thing you would do is enter the grid and fly down the center of the mountain at about 1,000 feet, 1,500 feet. And what we're doing is we're starting our contour search. And we start the contour at the top. So we were going down the mountain range. The observer would be looking to see, you know, are the hikers missing towards the center of the mountain? Is the downed airplane? You know, so you'd be looking for trashed foliage. You know, plane tears the hell out of trees when it crashes into them. As representative of that, let's check our fuel. How we're doing on fuel? Half tanks, okay. We could be up here for a couple hours. So, fall down the center, you know, and just to get back to the Schuylkill County airplane crash, he tore the tops of the trees off. Like, you could stand at the back end of the plane where it came to rest and look back, and you see blue sky. Like, he tore the trees completely apart, which then ripped his plane completely apart. And there was wings and appendages of the plane scattered all over the wreckage. It was typical of what you would think. So you'd get down to the end of your grid, and then you would drop down another 500 feet. So we're going to follow the contours of the mountain. And now we're going to fly the ridge line. And circle the entire mountain, or the part of the mountain that's a part of our grid. So then we come down ridge line, now looking at a lower level. So maybe the plane crash or the hikers are now lower on the mountain. And you would do this getting lower and lower each pass. You would drop 500 feet. to get that different viewpoint. Just kind of demonstrating, what a mid-level search of the ridge would look like. And you get right up in there. So it was dangerous work, especially like today, the wind tossing us around. You could get tossed into the mountain. And of course you'd be doing this at 80 knots. 80 knots was the standard for reviewing. And you'd go around the mountain till you got to the bottom, and then you would reverse the search. So you could get that different viewpoint. That, ladies and gentlemen, is a contour search. And yes, that would take a few hours as well to do. Each search took anywhere from an hour and a half to 2 hours, 2.5 hours. The pilot would search his grid, and when he was finished with the grid, he would come back to the airport, refuel, maybe get a snack or a cup of coffee, and back up he'd go to another grid. And we'd do that all day for as long as it took. 3 days usually was the standard. And and then it would call off the search if no one was found. And, that was an unfortunate thing we always wanted to find. In the 4 years that I did Solar Patrol, I had, I think it was three or four finds where our unit had actually found somebody. Now there was other, we'd be on missions and there'd be other units, and we'd go all over the state. There was a missing persons mission in Latrobe, and we were out of Hazelton. We did things to, I remember we were traveling down the turnpike heading out towards Pittsburgh, and we got a call on the radio that we needed to set up a communications relay. We had the equipment to put up an antenna, and we relayed communications from Latrobe back over to Allentown, I believe it was. Somewhere at a rest stop past Harrisburg. Boy, did we get looks. Because, we picked a point in the backside of the rest stop and set up this huge antenna array. It was always, we always got this weird connotation with, you're, a lot of discriminatory things, you're just a bunch of kids. It was, I always had a lot of problems, but, we were backed up. The state police would always back us up. I remember the one time, we were at an air show over at, Wilkes-Barre International, and my brother, he was giving a group of people that were there. We had a stand at the air show, and there was a group of people, and he was demonstrating the emergency locator transmitter and our locator, and he turned it on, and we got a signal. It was warbling away, and it was close. It was on the airport. So we ended up following it, and it took us over to the FBO Millionaire at Wilkes-Barre. And once we found a location, we had to, our job by law was to silence that, to mark and silence that emergency locator, so that the SARSATs would get a false hit. So we had to get access to the tarmac at Millionaire, and the guy at the FBO was like, absolutely not. A bunch of kids. I'm not letting a bunch of kids out on that tarmac. And it was like, well, you have to. I'm not doing it. So it was an air show, so the state police was there. We went over to the state police and said, hey, we were in uniform because we did a lot of things there, parking and stuff like that. And I'm setting up for landing here. The one other search that I wanted to demonstrate would have been a creeping line search, it's called. And I could do it real quick. So say we were looking for a downed airplane. The creeping line search would have been used for a downed airplane. And our last known, we weren't getting any LT, but our last known was along an airway, which is like a highway in the sky. So it's similar to a grid search, but shorter. So we picked that line, that airway, and we would just S-turn across that airway. And in parallels with perpendicular to that airway, and just creep down the line. That's why it's called creeping line search. To look for that downed airplane. So, anyway, back to my Millionaire story. Sorry about sidetracking there. State police came, told the guy that nope, you have to let these people out on these individuals out on the tarmac because they are required to find and silence that signal. Boy, the look on his face when he opened up the door to allow us going on that tarmac. But it's funny. So sometimes an ELT can go off if you land hard. And we found it was actually a FedEx cargo plane that was parked on the far end of that tarmac. That pilot must have landed hard, and he didn't know that he triggered his ELT. So I thought that was funny. Anyway, I'm gonna set up here for landing. And there's a lot of cool things. A lot has changed with Civil Air Patrol, modern Civil Air Patrol. I don't know about the experiences people had. I've read. I read online, just doing my research a little bit, kind of refresher. People just having horrible experiences. I mean, there was a lot of things with, ugly people, power tripping people, that kind of thing. We had that back then. People took the, I'm a lieutenant, like, to the maximum. And, but, you get that with everything. So, I don't know. I guess it all depends. I had a good squadron that I belonged to. We were all friends. We were all close-knit. And, I had my experience with Civil Air Patrol. I had a wonderful time. And I'm grateful for that experience. And, a lot of that experience is, translated into my adult life. So I wouldn't discourage anyone going into Civil Air Patrol. Try it out. Hopefully you get that squadron, that camaraderie. Full, bring back power, a little high. I found a more modern communications is different. They no longer. Pennsylvania used to be the call sign for Civil Air Patrol for Pennsylvania was Keystone. It's no longer that. Everything's CAP, CAP, and each state has a number that they get designated. So there's the state number, group number, and then mission number, I believe, and that becomes your call sign. So it's CAP, 4213. Used to be Keystone. The rank structures have changed. Obviously, the uniform is more that desert uniform. Or digital camo, or whatever they call it. Power, flare. Allows me to come up. Keystone 20. This is Keystone 203. Our in time is 17:59 Zulu. Or on time. In would be when we parked. 32 years below rust. Taxi in here. So that, ladies and gentlemen, is how the basics of aerial search is conducted. Now there's a lot more types of patterns that you can do, different types of searches. Those were the three basics: the creeping line, the contour, and the grid pattern search. A little pressed for time, so I wanted to get into the history of Civil Air Patrol, but if you look up the national headquarters of Civil Air Patrol, they have the whole write-up about how it started in 1941. They were used in civil defense against World War II. And it's actually pretty interesting. So I recommend that. All right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for watching this. I hope we learned a little something about a different aspect of aviation. It's kind of the mission goal of my channel is to cover all different types of aviation out there. One of them is the search and rescue. And I appreciate you guys watching me. I hope you learned, learned a little about Civil Air Patrol, learned a little about search and rescue, how to fly search and rescue patterns, and this translates into other things. So if you wanted to mock up a Coast Guard mission, they do grid pattern searches, Coast Guard, looking for missing boats. So if you're going to be doing, in your simulator, if you're going to be doing a search, it would be that grid pattern search. You guys can mimic those things and make it more realistic for you. Thank you very much for watching. Like and subscribe to my channel. And if I added a buy me a coffee link to my channel. It's absolutely not a requirement, but if you wish to support me, please do so. Until next time, clear skies and smooth landings. See you.